What's up? This is David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital, and you're listening to The Long Game. In this episode, we sit down with Chris Mobayeni, VP of Marketing at Simon Data. Chris has roots in experiential marketing, working at Reebok early on in his career, and eventually transitioned over to the more data-driven side of marketing as VP of Marketing at Wunderkind and now VP of Marketing at Simon Data. We talk a lot about his career path and how marketing and the role of marketers is evolving to require more analyst-like skills. Chris shares a hot take about why the best marketers are B2B marketers. That's right, you don't hear that very often. And he shares ways that B2B marketers can be creative. He shares his approach to marketing and why it's a bit different to how others approach it. In a world where many marketers rely on data to make decisions or rely on old playbooks, how do you stand out and how do you do something creative and make some big bets? And Chris shares a bit about how he did that in his roles. He also shares some really interesting insights and has a really unique approach to marketing. I think Chris is going to get you to think about how to do your marketing very differently. Here's my conversation with Chris Mobayeni. Hey, Chris, it is so great to finally have you on the pod after working together for so long. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited. I was wondering when I would get my invitation.
Oh, you're just waiting, twiddling your thumbs, waiting for me to message you on Slack about it?
Exactly.
So let's start at a place where I think most people know you of. You were VP of BounceX, now Wunderkind before, now you're VP of Marketing at Simon Data. Tell us about the career milestones that got you to this position in the first place.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a a variety of different roles at a couple of different kinds of companies. I mean, like super early in my career, I was at a couple very early stage startups that I won't even mention because they didn't even go anywhere, as a majority do. But I like really loved the environment, and I really liked the startup life. But I ended up, it's one of those things where it's like, who knows? Like, I don't think I'll enjoy, the big global brand corporate environment, but like, you should try everything once. And I had a really cool opportunity come up at Reebok, and the startups were similar to what I'm doing today. It's like it was like B2B SaaS effectively.
But you're comparing Reebok to B2B SaaS?
No, well, I started B2B SaaS, went to Reebok because I think like I love B2B marketing because it lets you get like really creative and it's very challenging. But I think there's something very romantic about brand marketing in a way, like selling to consumers. It's a little less of like a logical sale, it's a little bit more appealing to emotion. And I think landing on like, my last few roles are like B2B to C, you kind of get a little bit of both worlds, but so I wanted to try, it was kind of both. It's like, what would it be like to be at a huge company compared to a startup of 4 or 5 people? And then what it would be, what is it like, working on a consumer brand? And originally when I joined at Reebok, it was on the global brand experience team as part of like their global marketing team. And so it was a lot more like event activations at like South by Southwest and the Reebok CrossFit Games. And we did some really like cool, interesting stuff there. Different like in-store activations. I remember like one of the projects we were piloting was the talking shoe. So it was this insert that would go into a shoe that we piloted at like finish line. And when you picked it up, it would detect like what part of the shoe you were looking at and tell you different, features about it. It was a total flop, but it was a fun idea. And so it was a lot of stuff like that. It was more like brand oriented, experiential. And then later in my time there, I got more exposed to kind of the e-commerce side of the business and the stuff that like, you and Alex are so familiar with, like conversion rate optimization, like different A/B testing that you can do. And I thought that was really fascinating to me. Like I'm analytical enough. I'm not an analyst, but like I liked being able to tweak that side of my brain versus just like the purely creative side of marketing. And that's eventually what led me back to BounceX. Like I loved my time at Reebok. I learned a ton that I still apply to, the work I do today. But then what they were doing at the time, as they were Bounce Exchange and then became BounceX and then eventually Wonderkin. But I joined there because I wanted to do more of what I was doing at Reebok on the optimization side and like, what is it that actually gets people to convert? What is it that gets people to take the next step, but across like a much broader portfolio. And so that was my initial role there. I joined when I think one of like the first 20 employees.
You were early.
Yeah, it was really early. It was like, and that was, again, like it was still just purely, the on-site behavioral exit intent, like, it was very CRO focused. Now it's, much more of a like revenue channel, email, SMS play. But, that's what attracted me there. And originally I was more on the like client strategy side. Like I had a portfolio of clients and I was coming up with like, all right, like what are the different behaviors that indicate intent? And like, what can we do in that moment? What message can we show to then get them to take the next step? It was super fun. And then from there, I moved on to, I basically like built, so going to milestones, one of the biggest milestones was at that point, our CEO at the time was kind of getting on calls with, he was playing a bunch of different roles as the CEO does at a certain point. When you scale, it's like you need to be a CEO and like let other people do these things. And two of the things that he was doing was getting on like late stage sales calls and basically trying to like outline, hey, here's what we would do for you if you signed on, because like the services and the strategy in addition to the technology was such a big part of our business model and what we did. It's like we give you the tech and then we tell you how to make it as successful as possible and then we do it. And so he was going kind of like selling that side of it. It's like, if you're bought into the product, I'll make you believe that the strategy is sound. And then he would then kind of support, once they signed, the actual team that was executing on that. And like, here's like the 5 like lowest hanging fruit things that we can do to start. And so I kind of went to him and I'm like, this isn't scalable. You can't do this. We should build a role in a team around this. And so I kind of became the guinea pig and loved it, man. Like, it's like I was meeting with just, the biggest brands in the world and like needing to pretend like I was the expert that they can do exactly how to get them to the next step. And then like actually then seeing it through once they signed and helping execute. And so piloted it out, we saw, the benefits of it and the ROI to the business, and then built a team around that. And then, the VP of marketing opportunity came up and I'm like, it'd be nice to be a marketer again.
Yeah. And so that brings you now to Simon Data and what you're currently doing. And you mentioned something interesting, and maybe this can blend into my next question, but you said B2B marketing allows you to be creative, which two things I've never heard someone put into one sentence before. Tell us more about that. Like, what do you mean by that? Because I think when people think about B2B marketing, it's like boring, do webinars, like there's a playbook that you kind of just run, but it sounds like you're doing it a little differently.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, when I said that, and maybe I could have chosen like a more appropriate word, but this is, if there's any like e-commerce marketers listening, this is totally going to offend them, but I've been in your shoes. I feel, I think B2B marketing I think the best marketers in the world are in B2B personally.
Hot take. Yeah.
And I think you're right. And this is a huge philosophy of mine. Like, I think like B2B marketing is so, like, a majority of it is so sterile and cookie cutter and everyone's doing the exact same thing. But operationally and on the demand gen side, like, especially for enterprise SaaS, the thought and planning that goes into the amount of nurturing that you need to do. You have such long deal cycles. Like, it's like genuinely running people through like the, business school AIDA funnel. And like, you have the time between each one of those steps and those conversions is so much longer than it is for like a $20 t-shirt on a website. You can go through that funnel really quick. And so it allows you to really think through like, what is the content and what is the messaging that someone needs at each one of these stages? And like, do we have that? If not, let's create it. And then like, how can we think through all the different channels that we have based on where that person is? How we can get that message in front of them. And so I think, so from that side of it, I think it's creative. From like the actual creative side and like the brand side and the messaging and like the actual side, yeah, I've always tried to say like, I would rather we fail. If we were to fail, we fail by trying to do something that's a little different and a little more exciting than try and do the same thing. And that's what leads to us not being successful. And I wonder, Ken, another one of my milestones and like one of the things I think I'm the most proud of was, being part of the rebrand. And like, I paused there because I don't want to say, it ultimately was my project, but like it took 30 people at the company. We built like a mini SEAL Team 6 team of 30 people from every department of the company that needed to be involved in one way or another to do it. And so like, it certainly wasn't like me who did it, but like being a part of that was so unbelievable and so fun. And that was, I think, our approach for the brand, like ultimately the brand that we built and like the creative identity and like the messaging and how we wanted to balance like the like eccentricity of the company with like the fact that it is expensive and the highest performing thing that was on the market, and balance those two things as well as capture both the brand of the company and I thought the employees that were in it. I think we did that by made a brand that combined those two things. It was the product and the people there. And the way that we launched it was like completely atypical to how I think a B2B brand would typically do that. So.
There's a lot I want to dig into there. I'm going to put a pin in that one there because I want to make sure we also let the audience know about what Simon Data does. Because I think that ties a lot into kind of your background and like the more data-driven side of marketing. So maybe in your own words, what does Simon Data do and why should people look at y'all?
Yeah, so Simon Data is really the first platform that's out there that makes it very easy and simple for marketers to create audiences based on all of the data that they have available to them. And that may sound very similar to, what a typical CDP says that it does. But I want to say like we're the only, but just to cover my bases in case there's someone out there that for some reason I don't know of, I'll say the first. But we genuinely are the only CDP that, and one of the only MarTech platforms I think that's out there that built our architecture on Snowflake, which is a cloud data warehouse. And why that's important is because there had been this war between, I think, the legacy marketing clouds, like Salesforce is like, we are the source of truth for your data. And then, CDPs came around and were like, no, like we should be the source of truth for your data. We can be, but we don't think a CDP needs or should be the source of truth for your data. I think the cloud data warehouse is one. And more brands, and not even just enterprise brands, like a lot of the D2C growth stage companies that we work with are adopting cloud data warehouses like Snowflake a hell of a lot earlier than would be normal. And I think like moving a data warehouse from being on-prem into this cloud format has made it much more accessible. Like it's not very cost prohibitive. And so we built Simon on a cloud data warehouse because that was the trajectory we saw the market going towards. And that allows us to integrate into a cloud data warehouse seamlessly and natively. We basically, like if you bring on Simon and you don't have a cloud data warehouse, you effectively inherit one because we're built on Snowflake. But say you have a cloud data warehouse, you're basically taking our UI and segmentation builder, which is just one of the best that's on the market and so easy to use without sacrificing how powerful it is. And you're basically just like plopping that off and plopping it onto yours. And why that's important is because a cloud data warehouse is very inaccessible to marketing teams. And most marketing teams actually probably don't even know if they have one or what it is. And if they do, like, they're not activating and powering their marketing campaigns right now because the legacy architecture that those tools were built on don't integrate with, these new CDWs. And so we're one of the only tools out there that allows that, because basically a cloud data warehouse is just like a data dump. It's like messy, it's unorganized, but it has just about everything. And you need a data engineer, data scientist to go in and write SQL and code to like get the marketing team the audiences that they want, that they then want to target through their channels. We totally eliminate that. Like we integrate it with it directly. You can go in and create audiences using all of your data. And if there's data that isn't in your data warehouse, because we are a CDP and not just a data warehouse tool, we can go in and unify all of that too from the other sources, but like sitting on top of your data warehouse. And what that means ultimately is because you have all of your data immediately accessible to you in real time, you can create better custom audiences, better segmentation, and then instantly sync that to all of your different marketing channels and get them to perform better. So like our clients see much higher return on ad spend, much lower cost to acquire a customer, much higher customer lifetime value, because it's quick and simple for them to create these highly targeted campaigns that ultimately are more relevant and perform better.
That is fascinating. So do marketers need to know SQL now to use Simon and like access?
Well, so that's the thing we eliminate. And that's always the barrier. It's like, all right, like say you're Apple, and this is a bad example because they would never do this, but let's say just for the sake of argument, let's say you're Apple and you're launching the latest MacBook, and the Apple store in Williamsburg is offering an in-store promo for anyone who trades in, their old MacBook for the new one. So as a marketer, you'd think, okay, well, if I'm trying to promote that to someone, who's the most relevant audience? Well, all right, let's look at people who have shopped at the Apple store before, at that specific Apple store. That lives in, one platform of theirs that they would need to get the data from. But then it's like, well, that's where I would start, but there's people there that probably aren't interested in a new MacBook. What's like the typical life cycle? Like what's the period where people usually upgrade? Let's say it's every 4 years is the average time that someone upgrades on to like a new MacBook. Okay, so let's look at people who have purchased a MacBook in 4 more years ago. And then maybe it's more likely that, if someone has been to the Genius Bar recently or like reached out online for support through like Zendesk or whatever they use for customer support, because they've been having problems with their laptop. It's like you start kind of going down and saying like, this is the ideal person that would most likely respond to this campaign. To get that data, like they're going to their data science team because all of it either lives in their data warehouse or lives in all these different platforms. They're writing the SQL, they're then needing to get back to them, and then they're needing to upload it to their different marketing channels independently. And that takes time. Like you put in a ticket, it's like a week, 2 weeks later, that data scientist comes back. Maybe it's not actually the data you wanted, it takes forever. Yeah. Time to value is very long. And so we're eliminating that whole process because now it's you don't need to know SQL. It's available in a very marketer friendly, accessible UI. You drop in all of that criteria that you want, and then it just syncs it to those different channels that you need.
That's so interesting. It's like you're removing that maybe more data science or data engineer who would normally be the one to pipe that data into the right place and give them what they want. And the marketer is almost like maybe expected or should be developing skills as an analyst. Like, okay, I have all this data available. Yeah. How am I going to use it? Or what insights am I going to pull? Or how am I going to create actions based on what I'm seeing here?
Honestly, I think that if there's any advice to give, I think that's good advice for an e-commerce marketer who might be listening. Like a marketer's role has changed so much from like the Mad Men era. Like I think that's one good example. Another is just like, performance marketers, the people who are, in charge of like their paid media spend. I would hire like an analyst or like statistician or a finance person for that role before if I was just plucking someone out randomly. That's like the skill set you need. It's like you're crunching numbers and making the numbers work more so than you are like really marketing, at least on like the campaign, like developing the campaign and setting the bidding strategy and all of that. It's the role has changed very dramatically, I think, for e-commerce marketers, at least.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about Simon Data first before digging into the other thing, because what you just did was talk about some technical concepts around data warehouses and ETL and getting data into the right place and segmentation and all that. Mm-hmm. But then there's this other part of your brain that you have to scratch, and it's more the creative side. And you talked about the Bounce X rebrand to Wonderkin, mm-hmm. and how you had one small part of that. And I didn't know this until I was doing some more research, but y'all did a flash mob at eTail West, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was like, when do you hear about a B2B MarTech company doing a flash mob as part of like a launch or a rebrand? So just tell us about that. Like what was the thinking behind that? Because you don't see that sort of campaign very often.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I think, well, it was a combination of things. It was one, like, my philosophy has always been, I want to like make B2B marketing fun. Like it's all the same. It's like walking through eTail West or walking through Shop Talk or any of those big trade shows. You go booth to booth to booth. It's all the same shit. And it's just so like, you're selling B2B. Like if you think about B2B versus B2C, like, yeah, like maybe the product is different, but like you're still selling to people and humans, like, and they can react to the same things that are successful for B2C brands that typically will, get a little bit more creative or get a little bit more fun or try and like appeal to emotion a little bit more. There have been so many times where, we got to the end of a deal cycle at Simon and at Wonderkin where, it was us head to head with a competitor, and ultimately we won out and our champion came back to us and they're like, honestly, we felt like you guys aligned more with like our internal, culture and mission more than they did. And like, that was the tiebreaker. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think it's like 80% logical, but like you can't discount like the emotional aspect of the sale. And so that's one piece of it. And then also, like I started my career doing kind of like the in-person event and activations and things like that. And and no one else really, I think, does that on the B2B side. Like, we can get into this later. I don't want to go on a tangent, but we like the campaign that we had at eTail and Shop Talk this year at Simon was like super thought out and like an incredibly integrated activation. But so going back to Wonderkin,
I would love for you to dig into that. By the way,
totally.
Wonderkin, yeah.
And so already like the brand strategy, it was already, I think, very unique and innovative in that we didn't build the brand around a specific like color or a specific font or a specific type of imagery. Like we didn't want the brand to be one thing because we wanted to convey the one-to-one aspect of our product. Like it enables one-to-one marketing at scale. And so we wanted the brand to feel like it could shift and evolve and, but then still be part of one cohesive system, which was like, I remember when I spoke with the agency that we worked with on the creative side, Multi-Adapter, like the best agency experience besides you guys, I think, that I've ever had in my life. Like they're sorry about that. Multi-Adapter, like one of the best agencies I've ever worked with. They're phenomenal. And I remember that initial meeting describing that's like what we were going for. And they're like, that is an incredibly ambitious goal. But they absolutely nailed it. And where we landed was, the brand was developed around these a number of different like shapes and patterns that we could mix and match with the color styles. And like, that is what the brand was about. And so it like through different pages, through the website, through our collateral, through any kind of creative content that we would make, it was just very dynamic. And so we had this bold ambition for the creative side of the brand. And we were at this weird inflection point where like, if you knew BounceX, you knew, but like our brand awareness was not at the place it needed to be for like the caliber of clients that we worked with and like the, you know, performance that we drove. Like we were still kind of under the radar. And so we wanted to do something just very loud and different. And so you probably saw the flash mob video, but the cool thing about that campaign was that it was it was a fully integrated strategy. Like the plan was that at eTail, our booth, and we had sponsored, I think, the check-in desk, the key cards, and we had some signage kind of throughout. And our booth, like all our screens and everything were like 404 errors. And like the creative was a 404 error. And like the whole idea was like BounceX is down. And the key card branding we did, there were 3 different versions. Each like
so you sponsored the hotel key cards, like everyone that was staying at the hotel.
Yeah, so everyone who got to everyone who stayed at the hotel.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, and there were 3 versions of the key card you could get, and if you combine the 3 of them, each had a clue, and if you combine the 3, then it basically gave you a time, a date, and a location, which ended up being the location for the flash mob. But the whole idea was, oh no, you froze on me. Are we still good? Oh, sorry. I don't know if I lost.
I think we're back. I think that might have been me. Well, where I last got you, and we can cut that little part out, was when you combine the cards. So maybe you want to kind of reset.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there were 3 different versions of the card. And then the idea was to get people to like kind of socialize and be like, oh, which one do you have? Like, let's match them up. And if you combined all 3, it would reveal a date, a time, and a location, which ended up basically being the date and time location that we did the flash mob. But the answers of the flash mob before that was on like the last day, because if you've been to eTail West before, you know, it's like on the last night after all like the different client, like vendor happy hours and everything, everyone comes back to that hotel lobby and it's packed. It's like huge. Everyone's just like hanging out there late. So that was the time we were like, whatever we do, that is the place we want to do it.
Interesting.
And then the dancers were there the days before. They were all around the conference in these jumpsuits. That was like the BounceX tech team. Like they were basically trying to diagnose and solve the 404 error that we had.
Were they employees or did you hire a dance team?
Yeah, we hired like some dance team.
Okay, because I come from like a hip hop dance background. I was like, oh, if those are employees, they should be like professional dancers because they're pretty good.
No, they were these like local dancers. I'm blanking on what the name of the group was, but they were awesome. They were super cool, and like so even like when they were around, like they were doing like weird shit. Like they were like like just going up to people and like. I forgot what it was. Like we had like newspapers that, or sorry, we had newspapers too. We had like, now it's coming back to me, all the random things we had as part of this. They're like stringing these newspapers around. That was like news of us being down. We had boxed water. That was like the milk carton where like someone's missing. It was like BounceX is like, where is BounceX? You know, it was like, we had a bunch of
went all out.
Yeah, I mean, but like it was like relatively super cheap. It's not like it was via an expensive sponsorship outside of the key cards and the check-in desk with eTail. Like, and like it was like a guerrilla marketing campaign in a lot of ways. Like we just covered the entire venue with just like all of these random things related to it. And they would do, you know, when they were walking around, they had these like laptops that they were on. They would do like little choreographed stuff where they would like move in the same motion. It was super cool. But so then ultimately all of that was like leading up to then that moment. And these people that the attendees had seen that entire week, all of a sudden like pour in. And then it's probably the video you saw, like, you know, they do this flash mob, they take off their tech team jumpsuits and reveal kind of the new logo. And then we had we had to get really creative with how we did this, but then like the banners unfurling, like revealing. And that was the thing. That wasn't even the brand reveal. Like our plan was, let's do the name reveal, because we had a name change and a rebrand. So like, let's do the name reveal, have that build buzz for the actual brand reveal, which we were going to do at Shop Talk. And then COVID happened, which was the most chaotic, stressful time of my life. Because we had planned A, B, C, D, and E for executing this rebrand. And then none of them included a global pandemic completely disrupting our plans. That was the plan. We were going to do something equally big at Shop Talk for a reveal. But that was just the name launch. And so the plan was, all right, like, let's garner some attention. Let's announce the name. We got we got probably the best piece of press we've ever gotten from TechCrunch. Because, and this is another thing, I feel like I'm going on about this a little bit, but this is another thing that I think is really important when you're planning any kind of like big reveal or announcement, is trying to pair it with as many things as you can and packaging it up to like make it a little bit more compelling and see where people bite. Like we packaged it up with us passing $100 million in revenue. And so that's what got TechCrunch's attention, because that's all they write about anymore is like that and like fundraising. But then we're like, because we raised, we've surpassed this massive milestone, like we're entering this like next stage of our company's growth. And because of that, we're changing our name to Rebranding. And so we got the rebrand story out there by like packaging it with this hook that we knew the press would really bite on. And so, yeah.
That's fascinating. I know you had maybe a story to share about how you did something similar for Simon Data, but what fascinates me about that whole story and the whole campaign is I come from the world of data is like a god. Like we do what the data says to do. And we build out growth models to understand what ROI we're going to get from the campaigns we run. I'm starting to move away from that, knowing that not everything lives in a spreadsheet and not an entire story can be told there. But I feel like that's what a lot of folks are doing, where there's a trend where marketers kind of rely a little too much on data in order to tell them what to do. And there's less of these sort of campaigns like what you're running, where it's more brand focused, more getting at some human emotion. So if you were at a company that was less embracing of that sort of campaign, or if you were to speak as someone who wants to run that sort of campaign, how would you advise them going about making a case for something like that?
Well, you need both, right? Like, you need both. I would say the most important thing to do first is make sure your demand gen program is solid. Like, because if you go and do something like this and like expect it to just generate demand when like you're not already doing it, if that program isn't already optimized, then you're just wasting money. Because that's the thing. Like if you think about it as like a literal funnel, and to even put it in e-commerce perspective, like the way I think about driving revenue for an e-commerce company, it's you have acquisition campaigns that fill the funnel for very high converting, well optimized, like retargeting, remarketing, and nurture campaigns. Like if those convert at a very high rate, then like all you really need to do is just find ways to just fill that funnel, and then the machine takes care of the rest. And I think like on the B2B side, you really need to think about it the same way. Like if your demand gen program is solid, that's when you can kind of be like, hey, I don't necessarily know how we're going to measure the ROI of this. We kind of just have to like trust it. And that, 70 to 80% of your budget should be more on the things that you can measure, and then take that 20% and like just do things that like, you're like, I feel like this will work. And the whole idea for those is just like same thing, like just funnel in, fill that top of the funnel of those that highly optimized demand gen program that you have. And like, even at that conference, and like the whole reason we did what we did at, eTail and Shop Talk this year for Simon was, at the end of the day, it was a demand gen play. Like in both instances, we had people coming to the booth being like, you guys are everywhere. Like, what is going on? What's happening? And like, that is the hardest thing to do at those trade shows, is like actually get people to come to your booth who like want to talk to you. So it's both. Like you need to make sure that the things that you can measure are in a good spot first before you go and like start throwing money at like something that's a little less attributable.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about like this barbell portfolio, like same thing of financial portfolio building. Like you kind of want 80% are safe bets, bonds, ETFs, 20% go mess around with crypto and stock picking, whatever, but make sure you have the safe bets taken care of. And we had a good friend, Joe Lee, on the pod. He's VP of marketing at Entra. And he was saying, yeah, my first goal as a VP of marketing joining a company is build trust. And that means getting demand gen in place and showing I can get leads and revenue and pipeline. And then I'm going to pitch them on to big projects. But without that stuff, they're not going to trust me. Why would they want me to do some huge brand campaign if I can't even show I can get revenue?
Exactly. There's a really good book I read a while back. That's saying a lot because I have a hard time reading books. But I think it was called The First 90 Days. And it kind of speaks to what you're talking about. It's like, it's this idea of like vicious cycles or vicious circles where that is the first thing that you need to, it's basically like, whether it's like joining a new company or transitioning into a new role, like what do you need to do in those first 90 days to set you up for success? And it's like one of the first things, it's like find out the people who are influential, who are like your peers or your, other stakeholders, and like build a relationship and build trust, because and that first thing that you do is what everyone is going to remember. Like if like you can come out of the gates and be very successful, everything else that you want to do that's kind of experimental is easy. But if you come out of the gates swinging and it totally flops, now everything that you do after that is going to be so heavily scrutinized. And so like that, like you don't need in a new role or at a new company. I just went through this. It's like, you don't need to come in and do something crazy to get people to be like, oh, he's doing great. Like I'm sure there's low hanging fruit. There's always low hanging fruit. And like, I'm sure we still have low hanging fruit that I don't recognize. I just recognize the things that I see. And like someone else will come with a different perspective and be like, oh, these are the things that like he should have done or she should have done. But there's always low hanging fruit. So like do that, like get the quick wins, build trust. It's like the book basically said exactly what you just laid out. It's so true.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, even once you're beyond 90 days, it's easy to look at the next big thing, but there's usually that thing you're missing that is pretty easy to do with low effort, but could have high impact, that because it's so easy, it's also easy to kind of brush off and say it's not worth doing because there are other bigger problems to solve.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take this conversation for a left turn, because in doing my research about you, you search Chris Mobayeni, and you find your Quora profile. And the one answer you provided was to a question about how much it hurts an NHL goalie to stop a slap shot. And what was fascinating wasn't just the response, but the fact that that was the only answer you've ever provided on the platform. It's like you're about to start answering all these questions about hockey, but decided, no, I'm not going to do this. But I learned you play ice hockey in high school and college. So
that's so funny. I totally
tell us about that.
Yeah, man. I think I like signed up for Quora when it like first came out, and like that's when I was like still playing hockey. So that's probably the first thing I thought about. And then I don't think I ever used it again as like a contributor, I guess. That's really funny. Yeah, I played hockey growing up, like and ended up actually, I played pretty competitively. My last 2 years of high school, I ended up going to a boarding school like an hour east of Toronto in this like tiny town called Port Hope, Ontario, and played out there for 2 years, which was like the craziest experience of my life. It was so fun. Not just like being able to, like I never dreamed I would go to like another country to like play the sport,
Yeah.
But also it was just like a phenomenal like experience being at that school, because, there were people from all over the planet who were there. Like there were a bunch of people from like the Caribbean that they would like kind of recruit and bring into school. They had a really good cricket team. So there was a bunch of people from like India and like Eastern Asia. My best friends in the boarding house that we're in were from Toronto, Germany, Spain, and Cuba. And like, wow. So I would get into like, the like like arguments about like capitalism versus socialism with legitimate Cuban when I was like 16. Like it was so that was like an experience that like I think really set me up, I think, for the rest of my life. Just like being exposed to so many different cultures at such a formative age was, I think, really valuable. But yeah, I love hockey. I mean, you can see back there, I'm a diehard Caps fan. I'm from DC. I have the front page of the Post when they finally pulled through and won a cup. And I was like, now I can die in peace. 2018.
Have they won since?
No. I mean, they had a reputation. They were like one of the top teams for basically the better part of a decade, and were always playoff chokers. Like they never made it past the second round. And that was the first year that they finally broke through, and then they won it all. And ever since then, everyone's like, oh no, they've shaken the curse. And no, they just keep choking again.
Yeah, the curse is now back. They had their moment.
The curse just took a year off.
That is awesome. And then you played in college too. So, I mean, were there plans to ever go pro, or
I actually did. I didn't play in college. I did some like intramural stuff. So I was and this is something I think like at least in like a professional environment, I think is getting more attention, just like around burnout. But like after the 2 years, I was like playing hockey 6 days a week, and sometimes like 2 times in those 6 days. And it becoming like a job and not like a hobby. Like I was very burnt out. And I also, I never had any expectations to go pro. Like I'm like 5'0" and I was a goalie. Like I was never going to play pro. And that was like, even going there was kind of me like proving to myself, it's like what is my ceiling? Like how far can I take this? Cause I had zero expectations. And I had a couple like offers from like random D3 schools that I like hadn't applied to, and then I like got into some like better schools, like including Northeastern, that I had applied to, and it's like I should go to college to get an education, not like push a hockey career that's going to go nowhere, So
yeah.
But yeah, it.
Do you still get on the ice every now and then?
Now, it was hard living in New York, especially as a goalie. Before I had a car, I got a car during COVID, which was a lifesaver. And that has been, since then I've been going more. I've going on like, pickups and like open ice things. I fill in for some friends who are in a league every now and then. But it's tough, man. Like the adult leagues here, it's like the games are like 10 p.m. on a Wednesday. Like,
yeah.
I have to go to work tomorrow,
Yeah.
So I still get on the ice, but nothing like it once was.
Yeah. Hard to make time for those intramurals. I have friends who play pickup basketball like after work at like 8 p.m. And I'm like, first of all, you're in your 30s. That's high risk. you might tear something. Second of all, how do you still have the energy to do that after the whole day? Which very impressive. So if you're doing that, lots of respect.
What about you? Do you do any sports growing up or no?
I was just a hyperactive kid, to be honest. And in high school, or in middle school, I picked up like breakdancing. So that was my outlet. And then in high school, I had a friend get me into badminton, actually. So I played competitively. And that was like a great outlet. I found a coach who I was actually thinking about the other day, but he helped direct my energy and a lot of my angst at the time at the sport. And so I was that kid that would watch Olympic Games for fun and analyze the plays that they did, and go to the local college to play pickup games, and go to San Diego to play like against other people. And so that became my thing. But since then, not really. I mean, I lift weights now. I no longer dance, but that was a big outlet for energy and like to avoid burnout at the time too. So I kind of took school seriously. I was working like multiple jobs, and I had dance as a thing to keep like keeping my space, Where
were you performing? Was it like, were you in any like school clubs?
So I went to UC Irvine. You're turning this around on me. I went to UC Irvine, which is known as a dance school. Like Cabo Modern was a well-known dance team that came out of there. Lots of people go on to like be backup dancers for Beyonce and stuff. And so I was kind of surrounded by a lot of dancers. I was part of like the hip hop club, and we performed locally at local events or on campus. So nothing serious. It was more about, we would travel to like jams though. So we would be competing against some pretty, like we see them on the big stages now, but we were competing with them at like small school like college gymnasiums and like battling.
Right.
So it's that was how I spent my time in college.
That's so sick. I have mad respect for people who are like very talented, accomplished dancers. Like I just don't have that level of coordination with my body. And that's always like what I'm in awe of when I'm just watching like a very accomplished, talented dancer. It's just like, oh my God, like it's super cool. I didn't know that about you. Huh.
Yeah. I mean, the fear I had when I was dancing was, oh, one day I'm going to be old and I'm going to be saying, oh, I used to be able to do that. It's what has happened because I don't do it anymore, which is a shame, but I still enjoy watching competitions and supporting. So
yeah, I thought the same thing about like when I was playing hockey when I was younger. And I always thought it would be like when I was like 70, and I didn't realize it would happen so soon.
It's way quicker than that. All right. So maybe some closing questions here. And we can get into these. You can answer as long or as short as you'd like.
Sure.
So we talked a lot about business and you shared a couple hot takes here already, but what's one opinion you have about business or marketing that you think a lot of people would disagree with?
Ooh, I have a few.
Feel free to share all of them.
No, I'm trying to think of what's the one that'll get me the least in trouble. I mean,
those are less interesting ones.
Yeah. I mean, okay, I'll settle in the middle with you. And this is a very hot take given my background and what I do now. But I'm actually, and we talked about this when you were in New York, kind of. But I think there are starting to be some serious questions raised, especially with like what's happening around, the updates that Apple has been making with like iOS 14 and everything since with pixel tracking and like third-party cookies. And I mean, but especially the former, around like whether D2C e-commerce is a sustainable business model. Like there are, companies that were more established, I think when that happened, it's been like it's more than an inconvenience, but it's like they just have to like rejigger their strategy and figure out like how they can cope with it. If you were a like very early stage e-commerce company that was relying primarily on Facebook for customer acquisition, like 90% of them went out of business. And it's like kind of a shame. And then even like, bigger brands, like I can't remember the last D2C IPO that was like has not completely tanked. You're seeing a lot of brands that are kind of going under right now, and I think it's a legitimate question. But I do think one of the common threads are like the ones that I think struggle the most are the ones that have serious questions around like retention and customer LTV. And so I think that is, I'm noticing that as like a trend where I think, especially in the down market, every company is, focusing, like cash is king, right? But I think like for VC-backed companies, top line growth, which has always been, the North Star, is starting to take a bit of a backseat towards more like profitability. But I think that's kind of something similar that's happening in e-commerce too, like whether you're VC backed or not, like retention is really, I think, the common thread in what a lot of those big flameouts have been. But I think it's something worth looking at. Like, I'm not saying that D2C e-commerce is not going to be a thing and all those companies are going to fail. Like, I'm not saying that, but like, I don't think it's I think it's a more challenging business model than people once thought.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until you said that right now, but there was a period when there was like Casper and Hims and all those other D2C companies with honestly brands that all look like they worked with the same agency, but you haven't heard about, or I haven't heard about a new D2C e-commerce brand that has kind of broken through the noise in the last couple of years. There was sort of just a surge of them at one given time.
One thing I have been noticing is the rise of D2C brands that work in a subscription model inherently. Like I know people, there were just like regular e-commerce brands that were adding in kind of subscription programs, but like, I don't know. I wonder if I can say his name. But
always bleep it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to describe his company. I don't know, but like, anyways, well, we'll figure it out later. So someone I have kind of a good relationship with from my time at Wunderkind is Ryan. I always call him Ryan Babs. I'm not going to butcher his last name, but he was the founder at Greats. And then his new company he started, I forget the name, but it's basically this like shower head that's supposed to be like better for your skin. And it's like, oh, you need to replace the filter every like 2 months or 3 months. And they just like auto put you into that. And I think that's one example, but I've seen a few companies that are like that. And I think it's like around the idea of like having, MRR and ARR and trying to like build it like a SaaS model and get VC funding that way. And I think that's like the challenge, like all those darlings, like you mentioned, Casper, it's like they raised a bunch of VC funding with like the expectation, like with every business that you'll at one point get profitable, but there wasn't the retention play there. And so that's another interesting trend I've just kind of noticed is like, Yeah,
I have one of those mattresses, not a Casper, but I can't imagine replacing it very often. So don't know where the recurring revenue comes from.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's one impactful piece of advice that you've been given?
I always have a really hard time answering this question when people ask. I don't know. So I'm going to cheat here a little bit because this wasn't direct advice that someone gave me, but it is a quote that I refer to as advice very often. I forget who said it, but it's basically either do something worth writing or write something worth reading. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, I don't know. I think it's a very good way to like approach and like live your life. It's like, and I think it's like it touches kind of both, I think I have both a very like business oriented, analytical kind of entrepreneurial side of my brain. And I have a creative side of my brain. I have like, the crazy, like play hockey 6 days a week side of my brain. And then I have like the, like growing up and playing in punk and ska band side of my brain. Right. And so I think it kind of appeals to both. It's like, and in like any given kind of situation, it's what are you more likely to do? Are you going to flex the creative side of it? Or are you going to like do something that is, innovative and different and memorable? And so I forget where I first read it, but love that quote.
Yeah. Funny enough, after we hung out in New York, me and Alex, we looked at each other, we were like, Chris is punk, isn't he? We were like, yeah, he's punk. We bet he played in a punk band growing up. We have like,
16-year-old me would still be so proud. I always feel like I think I'm a sellout now. So that was the nice.
No, you gave off the punk vibes. Yeah.
Funny.
What's one book you'd recommend more people read?
So I kind of mentioned that First 90 Days book. Another one that's really good. It's old, still holds up. It's by Andrew Grove, High Output Management. I give it to every manager on my team. It's fantastic. I think everyone should read it. This one's kind of cliche. I'm sure everyone listening has read this, but like a lot of the younger people that I work with surprisingly haven't. Cialdini's Influence. That's a book that I buy everyone if they've never read it. But yeah, I think between those three, First 90 Days, High Output Management, and Influence, like you have a great trifecta right there.
Perfect. Love those. I've read 2 of the 3, so I gotta get High Output Management. All right, last question here. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can definitely, if you're listening, add me on LinkedIn, please. Like I'd love just chatting with people. Even if you're trying to sell me, I still add people and then I regret it. But please add me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. I post in like spurts, I'm trying to get better about it. Be like a Twitter influencer, but I can't bring myself to do it. If You're not going to get any kind of like business commentary, but you'll have some half funny quips here and there. I'm on Twitter as it's K Mobsky, Mobsky. Yeah.
Awesome.
I've like really fallen off the social wagon, honestly. I haven't posted on Instagram in years. I barely post on Twitter. I like TikTok. TikTok's great. I don't post on there.
Oh, you're on TikTok. I'm not on there. I'm trying to stay away from that.
It's dangerous. Like, hold on, it scares me, man. Just dopamine roulette.
All right. Well, Chris, it was great having this conversation with you.
No, I loved it. I'm happy anytime.